Hi, everybody. Today we are going to learn about the process of glycolysis. So, glycolysis is the first step of cell respiration. And as you can see here, it tells us that cell respiration can be anaerobic or aerobic. All right, so what exactly does that mean? Anaerobic or aerobic? So, aerobic just means that the process uses oxygen. Oxygen is very helpful in producing energy. If we have an aerobic process, we usually get lots and lots and lots of energy. All right, now what is the main source of energy in our cells? What do our cells use for energy? Yeah, our cells are going to use ATP as energy. So aerobic respiration produces a lot of ATP. Anaerobic, the an means without, so without oxygen, that is going to produce less energy. So we're going to get a small amount of ATP, much less than with aerobic. And over the next few days, we're going to look at both aerobic and anaerobic processes. So the first step, regardless of whether we're doing aerobic or anaerobic, the first step is going to be glycolysis, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So what exactly is glycolysis? What you should note from this picture is that glycolysis is when we turn glucose into pyruvate. That is what essentially glycolysis basically is. Glucose into pyruvate. Based on the picture, the diagram that is here, where does glycolysis take place? Can you figure it out from the picture? Yeah, if you look at the picture, you can see here that it is in the cytosol or the cytoplasm. It's on like this bluish green side. That is where glycolysis is taking place in the cytoplasm. Now, once glycolysis happens, a few things can happen. We can move on to anaerobic respiration, like you see on the left, or we can move on to aerobic respiration, as on the right. So there are two different pathways after glycolysis, but it does not matter whether you're doing anaerobic or aerobic. They both start with glycolysis. So we're going to talk first about an anaerobic process. The process of anaerobic respiration has two steps. We start off with glycolysis, and then we move on and finish up with fermentation. All right. So step one, glycolysis. Glycolysis happens in the cytoplasm of a cell. And an important connection here between the location and the process. Every single living thing, regardless of whether it's a plant or an animal or a bacteria or a protist, they all do glycolysis. And guess what every single living cell has? They all have cytoplasm. So because glycolysis happens in every single cell, it happens in something that every cell has, which is the cytoplasm. So what is the overall process of glycolysis? We are taking glucose and turning it into pyruvic acid, or sometimes called pyruvate, another name for pyruvic acid. And we get three things out of the deal. We get 2 molecules of ATP. That is a very tiny amount of ATP, but it's something, but it's not very much. It's sort of like having $2. You can't really do all that much with $2, but you can use it for money. 2 ATP doesn't give you that much energy, but it does have a little bit of energy. We also get 2 NADH. Now, what does NADH do? What is that? So NADH is those energetic electrons. So we have energy in the form of electrons. Electron energy. And then we have 2 pyruvate molecules, and pyruvate molecules still have some energy stored. What do we call stored energy? We call that potential energy, or chemical potential energy is found in the 2 pyruvates. So we have 2 ATP, 2 NADH, or energetic electrons, and then we have some stored energy in the form of the 2 pyruvates. This is the process of glycolysis. Here we have glucose. The little black circles represent carbon. How many carbons does glucose have? We can see here it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is a 6 carbon molecule. Now, this picture is showing us very simply the complicated process of glycolysis. Glycolysis is a bunch, maybe 8 or so different reactions, and we're not going to learn all of those. We're just going to learn overall. That's what the arrow is showing us. Glucose is going to be broken up into 2 pyruvic acids. So how many carbons does each pyruvic acid have? Each pyruvic acid has 3 carbons. So 3 plus 3 is 6. So basically, we've broken a glucose in half. All right. Now, how do we break glucose in half, right? Well, your body does 2 things. We're going to start on the top. The very first thing that your body does is it sends 2 ADPs, adenosine diphosphates, and they're going to meet up with the glucose. That is what this arrow is showing. And when they meet up with the glucose is going to help stick 2 phosphates on the ADP to make our 2 ATP. So that process helps kind of destabilize the glucose, getting it ready to break in half. And then one other thing has to happen is that 2 NAD+, remember NAD+ is an empty electron carrier. The NAD+ is going to meet up with the destabilized glucose, and it is going to, what's it going to do? What does NAD+ do? It picks up electrons, right? So it's going to take 2 electrons away. And when it does that, the NAD+ becomes NADH. But in the meantime, taking those electrons away from glucose is going to help break the glucose in half to give us our 2 pyruvic acids or our 2 pyruvates. So overall, glucose with the help of ATP and NADH breaks in half and gives us 2 pyruvic acids. So look at the bottom here. This is a great synopsis that you should know of this whole process, an overview. We end up getting 2 ATPs, 2 ATP energies. We end up getting 2 NADHs, 2 molecules holding energetic electrons, and we get 2 pyruvates that are storing energy for later. That is what glycolysis gives us. And it's really important that you understand those products of glycolysis. All right. So a few questions you should be able to answer. Number 1, what are the products and reactants of glycolysis? And your second question is, where does glycolysis happen? Take a moment and answer those questions now. So the first question, what are the products and reactants of glycolysis? Well, let's start with the reactants. The reactants are glucose. Glucose is a 6-carbon molecule. The products of glycolysis include 2 ATP, 2 NADH, and 2 pyruvate. I'll just abbreviate that there. All of those things are holding energy in different forms. And where does glycolysis happen? You should know that it happens in the cytoplasm. Good. All right, now what if there isn't oxygen present? If there's not oxygen present, then something called fermentation is going to happen. If there is oxygen present, something else called the Krebs cycle is going to happen. We are going to get into that later, so that is all for now. If you have any questions, as always, please let me know.